Chamber funding from the Las Cruces Sun News, Comcast, Home Instead Senior Care, Jane's Construction, Memorial Medical Center, Sapphire Energy, Bravo Mike Communications, the Las Cruces Bulletin, and Adams Radio Group. Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for the Chamber Economic Forum. I'm Fred Martino. In a moment, we're going to have questions from our studio audience, but as we always do, we begin with opening statements from our economists from New Mexico State University, Dr. Jim Peach, Dr. Chris Erickson, and Dr. Ken Martin. They'll be talking about the national picture, the regional economy, and the financial markets, and we begin with the nation and Dr. Peach.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, KRWG and the Chamber, for putting this on again. The national economy is doing okay, but nothing to brag about. GDP, our broadest measure of economic activity, increased by 3.9% in the second quarter of the year and 1.5% in the third quarter. That's the early estimate. The consensus for the entire year seems to be about 2.4%, which is just slightly above the average we've had since the recovery began in the third quarter of 2009. That average of 2.2% over that entire time period is more than a full percentage point less than the 50-year average before the recession started. So we're doing okay, but nothing to brag about. In the labor market, non-farm payroll employment increased by 271,000 in October. That's a really good number. We've had 61 straight months of employment gains. Last year, in the last 12 months, we've averaged about 230,000, so we were a little bit above the 12-month average. We added 12.4 million jobs since we hit the bottom in August of 2010, but that's only a net gain of about 4.3 million jobs since the recession began in December '07. The unemployment rate remained at 5%. Some interesting little tidbits out of that recent Bureau of Labor Statistics report. If you had a bachelor's degree or higher, your unemployment rate was half of the national average, right at 2.5%. Married men with a spouse present had an unemployment rate of 2.8%, and women with a spouse present, 3%. So if you're unmarried, you're in trouble. U6, the broader picture of unemployment, fell below 10% for the first time since 2008 at 9.8%. And that sounds pretty good, but that still leaves 13.5 million people who are either unemployed, underemployed, or are discouraged from entering the labor market. The increases last month by sector: professional and business services increased by 78,000. That's well above the 12-month average. Healthcare and retail trade increased by 45 and 44,000, also a little bit above average. Food and drink by about 42,000, construction by 31,000, and no other sector had any significant gains or losses, and that's where we picked all that up. We're doing pretty well in some sectors. The automobile sector, we're likely to sell upwards of 17 million automobiles and light trucks this year. The October figure came in at an annual rate of 18.5, but that's way above the average for the rest of the year. So somewhere about 17.3, 17.4, and that's the first time since '06 that we will have sold that many automobiles. Housing, last month We had an 11.8% decrease in new construction and new housing starts. That was mainly multifamily housing. Single-family dwellings decreased by only 2.4%, but both of those numbers came in a couple of percentage points above where they were a year ago. So housing is doing okay. Again, nothing really to brag about. Got to mention commodity prices. Oil has been hovering in the low $40 range. Natural gas well below $3. It was $2.20 this morning. And at those prices, the new drilling has just dropped off considerably. And we probably have $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion worth of debt in that industry that's bad debt. Debt that was made when oil was $100 a barrel and is not worth much now at 40. It kind of smells like the housing crisis of 2006, 2007, but it's not as large. We had perhaps 10 or $11 trillion worth of housing debt at the time. But there's going to be some bad debt written down real soon. Okay, and then the big question of the day is, what will Janet do? What will Janet Yellen and her friends at the Fed do? And the only honest answer anyone can give you is, I don't know. But the betting seems to be in favor of a 0.25% increase in December. They meet December 15th and 16th. And the logic behind that is pretty solid. But it has been for quite some time. It was in March, it was in June, it was in August, and it was in October, and they didn't do it any of those times. But I think they've got to do it this time or look really, really silly. A 0.25 point has virtually no economic effect by itself, but if they announce once again that they're not going to raise interest rates, it's a signal that they think the economy is not doing well, and so I think they've got to do it. And I'll quit with that.
All right, we move to the region now, and Dr. Erickson.
Well, I have to say that Jim is willing to predict what Janet Yellen is going to do, or sort of predict it. I made a prediction they're going to make a change in October, and and then again I predicted the next meeting, and so I've decided not to say anything about that this time. But I will talk a little bit about what's going on with the state economy, and then later on the local economy. And right now, New Mexico is enjoying the second highest unemployment rate in the country at 6.8% versus the national economy at 5.1%. Total non-agricultural employment, which is kind of a measure of jobs, it doesn't include agricultural employment of people who, for which Social Security is not paid, but it grew for the state at 0.9% versus the national number of 1.9%. Jim mentioned oil prices, and you can see that also in employment at the state level. Mining and logging, natural resources is down 3.9%. We don't have much logging in this state, so it's mainly commodity prices depressing mining and logging. We've had layoffs at the copper mines in Silver City. We're having layoffs in the oil patch and also other mining operations. Now at around $40 a barrel, $45 a barrel, oil is at its long-term average over the last 30 years, which really tells you something, which is that we had $100 barrel oil not that long ago, and that $100 barrel oil is actually very expensive oil. And now we're in more normal times where oil prices are down around between $40 and $45 a barrel. That has implications for the state budget, and of course the lawmakers up in Santa Fe have been warning now that we're going to see cutbacks. There's also an increase in cutbacks over what was expected in terms of new revenue, and then also that there's an increased need for funding for Medicare and Medicaid, and that will mean that we'll have probably less funding available for other sectors or other programs at the state level. So it's going to be a tight year for the state legislature, most likely. Turning a little bit to Las Cruces, unemployment rate in Las Cruces is 7.3%. That's quite high. That's higher than the state average. That's also higher than it was a year ago at 6.7%. And job growth in Las Cruces was minus 1.8%. And so we are in a recession right now in our community, and this is continuing now for several months, for several quarters. Employment, which is measured by the household survey, showed that the number of people working was down 2.2%. What's driving this? There's a number of things driving this. The main driver is the decrease in federal spending, and in particular, this particular number here reflects the fact that we've had a drawdown of 600 soldiers at White Sands. The second engineers were relocated to other facilities, and not only are they relocated, but so are their families, and that's been a drag on the local economy. What I'd like to do now, what I want to do now is talk a little bit about what we can do to turn this around. And one of the problems we have is that economic development is a very long-term proposition. Changes we make today will have implications for the state 20 years from now, and will have very little impact on economic development in the very short run, because economic development programs take time to work. And one of the things you've been hearing a lot about lately is incentive programs at the state level. For example, LEDA, which is the Local Economic Development Act funds. LEDA funds were used, for example, to close the deal on the recent acquisition of the old Aldershot Nursery. The problem with these kind of programs like LEDA and other incentive programs is we don't have a lot of evidence that they really work. We don't have a lot of evidence that without these programs we would have a decline in or slower growth in our local economy. And I'm going to steal a suggestion from my good friend Jim Peach, who points out that this expenditure on economic incentives is almost exactly the same as the revenue generated from corporate income tax, and he suggests that we get rid of both of them. That if we got rid of the corporate income tax, that would provide just as much an incentive to businesses as all these incentives we have, and it would be a lot easier to administer and a lot easier to understand. In my few minutes I have left here, I'd also like to talk a little bit about education. Education, of course, this is a theme that I've returned to over and over again, is K-12 education. Probably the most important thing we can do in our community to improve economic development is improve K-12 education. And right now, New Mexico ranks 46 in teacher salaries, but we rank 36th in funding. That is expenditure per student, we rank 36, but teacher salaries, we rank 46. And the question you have to ask yourself is, where is that, what is that disconnect? Why are we funding our students quite well, but yet our teachers aren't being paid well? And I think that a lot of this arises from the kind of odd funding system we have in this state, where most of the funding goes to the state and then comes back to the local districts, and in the process, the state puts a lot of constraints on what the districts can do with the funds that they receive. And I think if we went back to a system where we gave more latitude to the local communities and allowed them to decide how to spend them, that we'd be able to attract teachers. And last comment I want to make on this issue is that teacher salaries are so important. They're very important because they are important for retaining good teachers, and they're important for attracting good teachers into the profession. And I have to say one thing is that my wife is a school teacher, so I have a little bit of an insight onto this. But even if she wasn't a school teacher, I'd be saying the same thing. Thank you.
Full disclosure. Thank you very much, Dr. Erickson. And we move now to Dr. Martin and a look at the financial markets.
Thanks, Fred. It's good to be back on the panel. I missed the last one. So the last one I was on was in January of 2015, so I thought I'd take a kind of retrospective look of the year in the financial markets. At the end of 2014, December 31st, the Dow Industrial Average was at 17,823. And if you checked Friday's closing price, it too was at 17,823, exactly where the year began. I mean, it's better than a stick in the eye, but normal is more like an 8% gain. The Standard & Poor's 500, not much better, a gain of about 1%. The NASDAQ index actually did gain about 8% since the beginning of the year. So pretty tranquil, it seems like. Well, if you were Rip Van Winkle, it would have seemed tranquil because you went to sleep and then woke up and the market's right where it started. But if you're like the rest of us and lived through it, you know that there was a little bit of volatility. Back in May, markets were hitting all-time highs. The Dow hit an all-time high of 18,351. The S&P hit a high about 2128, and NASDAQ in the middle of the summer hit 5218. And then just a few short months later, in August, by August, the Dow had sold off a little bit. It was down to about 17,500, so it sold off about 1,000 points from the high. And then on August 24th, Monday morning, woke up, turned on CNBC, and the Dow was going to open 1,000 points lower that morning. 1,000 points. How could that be? And it closed that day at 15,871, down 9% for the week. We were all thinking about those, not wistfully, but thinking about those days in 2008, 2009, those dark days when there was so much volatility in the market. So one thing I thought about is, what caused this, this sell-off? Can it happen again? What can we do to prepare for it? What seemed to be causing the sell-off, basically three things: China, interest rates, and earnings. And overlaying all of that is valuation. So I'm going to talk about those four things. So China, the finger quickly kind of got pointed at China because of the perceived economic slowdown in their rate of growth that they were projecting, and that it would drag the whole world down with it. Commodity prices were already crashing because of lower demand from China. They're moving their economy away from a infrastructure building economy to a consumer-driven economy. In terms of interest rates, the Fed had as much as promised that they would raise interest rates when they meet in December. And given that the rest of the world's central banks were easing at a time when the Fed is going to start tightening, that always gives the market willies. So, and then the interest rates, the prospect of higher interest rates has driven the dollar up in value, which has hurt earnings. So when earnings that are, companies earn earnings overseas and translate those back to dollars, they translate back to fewer dollars when there's a strong dollar. And this has led to corporate earnings expected to decline for the first time since the Great Recession. So there are fears of global economic slowdown. Then overlaying all of that is valuation. One of the most well-known factors or indicators of value is the Shiller PE, what Robert Shiller, economist at Yale University, calls the CAPE, cyclically adjusted price earnings ratio. And to calculate that, he takes the Standard & Poor's 500 and divides by a 10-year average of earnings for the S&P, thereby kind of adjusting for the ups and downs in the business cycle. The current value of that ratio is 26. Schiller maintains a spreadsheet on his website and updates this every month. So you can get really up-to-date information on it. The long-run average, which is over 100 years long, is 16. And we're currently at 26. 26 is high. It's not as high as it's ever been. That was roughly 40 back in the good old days of the dot-com bubble. But it still would indicate considerable overvaluation. So when you're dealing in a situation where there might be overvaluation and then you get these hiccups of fears of a global slowdown, is just going to exacerbate the selling. Okay, so those are some of the bricks that make up the proverbial wall of worry that the market typically climbs. And some of the counter arguments, though, to these bricks are in China. With respect to China, only 2% of sales by S&P 500 companies come from China. And 1% of US exports go to China. So in a sense, it's big, yeah, but maybe not as big as the market was fearing. Goldman Sachs went on record as saying, we don't expect there to be any contagion, and we see the economy continuing to expand. Interest rates. Yeah, the Fed is set to begin to normalize interest rates, and then there's a lot of Fed speak soothing the market, saying, okay, it's going to be a slow-going process. We're not going to crank up interest rates rapidly, but it'll be a slow-going process, and that seemed to mollify the market. And then the economy and predictions of when the next recession might occur. I'll skip that. I'm out of time. But I wanted to get to one more thing on valuation, and that's my fearless forecast of the Dow, where the Dow is going to be in 6 to 12 months. A year ago, my forecast, I think, was 18,400, and we got just about there in May. This time I did my forecast. I do a fundamental valuation of each of the 30 stocks in the Dow, then add them up and calculate the theoretical fair value of the Dow. And this time I'm getting a forecast of 16,067. It's about 10% lower than where we are now. So maybe what I'm thinking as I thought about this is that we're going to go back and retest those August lows. So in August, the market bottomed right at about 16,000 on the Dow. So don't be surprised if we have a market sell-off, go back down and retest it, and then move higher from there.
And we'll check that in the spring. Dr. Martin, thank you so much. And now it's time for our audience members to ask questions of our panel of economists, and we'll welcome our audience members to come up to the microphone. While we wait, let's take a look at October unemployment. In New Mexico, 6.8%. The only state doing worse, West Virginia, which is at 6.9%. As you see, the U.S. unemployment rate was just 5%. Las Cruces employment in between August of 2014 and August of this year, we did have some job growth in certain sectors. About 4% increase in the retail sector, nearly 8% in wholesale trade, nearly 16% in transportation, warehousing, and utilities. Now, the bad news for the Las Cruces area. Here are the job areas which declined. Business services down 12%, and you heard Dr. Peach mention that nationally business services actually saw an increase in employment, but not in the Las Cruces metro area, a decline. Other services down 12.5%, and natural resources, mining and construction, a higher paid industry, very disappointing to see that they're doing the worst, down more than 19% between August of 14 and August of this year. And we have our first question now.
In Rochester, they're doing poorly because of job losses at Kodak and Xerox and Bausch and Lomb. And now the major employer is a big hospital university complex. So my question to you, being new to the area, is what manufacturing do we have here? What prospects are there for manufacturing, and who are the major employers in the area?
So the major employers in the area, number one is the university, number two is White Sands Missile Range, and number three are the public schools. Now, White Sands Missile Range, if you include the subcontractors and contractors that work out there, is number one. It beats out the university, but that's not a single employer. That's a number of employers. When you talk about manufacturing, we are not a manufacturing hub. In fact, we have very little manufacturing in Las Cruces, and in general in the state, we have very little manufacturing. And I'm not sure, who do you Jim, do you have an idea who the largest manufacturer in the local area is?
Maybe the wire manufacturing plant
wire.
in Santa Teresa.
Yeah, I think
right, Bill?
that's probably right. We do have a lot of warehousing here that's associated with manufacturing not in the local area, not in Las Cruces, but from down in Santa Teresa, that's associated with the border crossing. People bring items across the border, or people are preparing to take items across the border, and they'll warehouse them temporarily in particularly Santa Teresa, but other areas in the county.
Okay, another question now, and we have with us Bill Allen from the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. Hi, Bill.
How you doing, Fred?
I'm doing well.
First, thanks for KRWG for hosting again, gentlemen. Thanks again, and Dr. Martin, good to see you. Dr. Erickson, you had mentioned that you looked at economic development opportunities as being long-term, taking a while to get through the pipeline and have some impact. Right. Are there any things that you can think of that might have a short-term impact to turn things around?
Well, the short-term item that is most pressing on our local economy is federal spending. And I don't see unfortunately that's out of our control to a large extent. And I don't see a much likelihood of a change in the trend in federal spending in the near future. We have a strong influence of the military here. As I mentioned, White Sands is one of our largest employers. Also, Fort Bliss is a very large employer, and when Fort Bliss expands, it spills over into our county. And when Fort Bliss expanded after the base realignment process, that led to a large increase in employment in our local area. But I estimate at the time about 0.5% per year in employment. And the problem is that those things are things that we can't control directly. The other thing we need to continue to press is we need to be, when people want to locate to our area, we need to be ready to provide them with services that will make it easier for them to locate here. They'll help them to locate. And we need professionals that are in place to do that. The state has some professionals, Mavita has some professionals, and those are very important to make sure that if someone is looking to locate here, that they don't have to search around, or they have someplace they can go for help to do that.
Okay, another question.
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm actually from Las Cruces. Have moved away and I'm down on vacation right now. My question dovetails with something that both Dr. Erickson and Dr. Martin have talked about, namely the strengthening of the dollar and manufacturing. But then on the national level, there have been forecasts of the dollar strengthening, perhaps to parity, perhaps even stronger than the euro. That was just last week that I had seen that. How do you feel that will impact the manufacturing sector within the United States in general, and if you could go so far as to say how that might impact the Maquiladoras and Santa Teresa?
Go ahead, you directed it.
We fight here over who's going to answer the question.
I can do it.
Well, I was going to say that I think that a stronger dollar is not good for manufacturing, generally speaking. It's not good for, it makes it cheaper to import goods from outside of the country. The impact on the maquilas is hard to measure because it's going to have It's going to, the maquilas, of course, Mexico in general imports a lot of their inputs from the United States, so of course that increases the cost of their inputs, but then it also increases the value, it reduces the cost of Mexican labor from the perspective of the United States, and Mexican value added from the perspective of the United States. So it's kind of a two-edged sword to that. I don't know, Jim, do you have anything that you'd add to that, particularly on the maquilas?
No, that's right on the money. Locally, it's not going to do much for us at all because we don't do much manufacturing, as we talked about earlier.
Another question now.
Yes, my name is Paul O'Connell, and I realize nationally the unemployment has gone down to 5%. But I think one of the big issues in the country right now is the wage situation, especially for middle class and poor. I would argue that's probably one of our biggest problems. And back in the 60s, where we had about 30, 35, 40% union in the private sector, now it's about 6, 7%. And the issue is people that are working either in service or retail, they just are having a tough time. They're really having a tough time. The cost of everything has gone up. The rent has gone up. The health insurance has gone up. Tuition has gone up, and but their wages have not gone up. Now, so back in the 60s again, we had a countervailing power that allowed not only the people that were in unions, but also the ones that got the benefit from that, as they got better wages, and that's kind of the time I grew up, quite frankly, and everybody, benefited from that. But now, for the middle class and the lower class, we have no countervailing power. They don't have any bargaining power. They just don't have the ability. They go and businesses such as Walmart and so forth can, if you don't make 30 hours, you don't get any benefits. They don't have the countervailing power that they did back in the 60s. What kind of countervailing power will give the middle class and the poor a little more oomph to get better wages?
Dr. Peach, what an interesting topic. Let's start with you on that.
We could talk about inequality all day long. Your question about countervailing power is a good one. We have reduced union membership, as you said, almost nothing in this country. The other thing that's happened is that we've broken the traditional link between productivity increases and wage increases. That's simply not there anymore. For close to 40 years during and after World War II, you could see the chart on productivity and the chart on wages doing almost the same thing. And for the last 25 years, that's certainly not been the case. And so one thing to do is to ask why. And we've set up a tax system that favors capital over labor, if you like, is one answer. And I don't see the countervailing force. I don't see unions coming back in a big way, which, by the way, I think was good for business as well as labor. If we don't have a strong consuming class in this country, if we can't buy the products that we're capable of producing, that's bad for business.
Yeah, because consumer spending it's about 70% of our economy?
About 70% of GDP.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's very important to understand.
And as we age, we're going to change our consumption patterns quite a bit. And we're going to reduce expenditures on the traditional kinds of things, on automobiles and electronics and even housing, and increase those expenditures on health care and services. It's going to be a different world.
Okay, so very important issue, one that certainly we'll hear a lot about in the next year with the presidential election. Deep divisions between the parties on what to do about income inequality and about wages. So this is a fascinating one. And certainly at the local and state level, we've seen action on this, not at the federal level, but at the local and state level, minimum wages have been increased, including, as you know, in Las Cruces.
But one other comment real quick. For 7 years now, we've had a very slow growing economy, and that has also hurt median wages in this country. And we know how to fix that. We really do know how to fix the rate of growth in this country. And we're so horribly afraid of this debt nonsense that people talk about that we won't do it. We can make the economy grow at a much higher rate than it is now.
You're addressing your belief that federal spending should increase on infrastructure and those sorts of things.
Sure.
Okay, sure. Okay, well, thank you. We'll hear more about this, Dr. Peach. And right now we have another question, and it's our city councilor from Las Cruces, Olga Pedrosa. Hello, Olga.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Just fine, thank you. I'd like to apologize ahead of time because I didn't study economics in college. I studied sociology. Now I'm reading a lot of history. And I'm glad that you mentioned income inequality, because basically that is one of the things that I think is affecting and being ignored by an awful lot of economists. I'd like to read you from The Economist, the perspective that Mr. Sen, that was Amartya Sen, describes and advocates has great attractions. Chief among them is that by cutting through the sterile debate on the market, for or against the market, it makes it easier to ask sharper questions about public policy. So my question is, I was getting the feeling myself that the debates about the market were getting kind of sterile. Predictions for one thing, predictions for another thing, and then, oh, well, that didn't happen. But no biggie, things change or cyclical. So what I would like, and I don't know if we can have this today or possibly at a future one of these forums, to get your ideas about income inequality and how best to do away with that. When I came to this country 70 years ago, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, my parents were they were not formally well educated, but they were both teachers. And they told me that one of the reasons they came to the United States and brought their family was because of the income inequality in Mexico. And now I'm finding that there's the same income inequality here. And so I'd like to get people's opinions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. And of course, Dr. Peach, you addressed in your belief the need for infrastructure investment. This certainly would put people to work in some cases in very good jobs, in construction, good paying jobs. Dr. Erickson, you talked about education, the need to invest in education, and to do that in New Mexico as well. Dr. Martin, we haven't heard your thoughts on this. Let's hear what you have to say about this, addressing income inequality, because certainly this is often directed at the corporate level. Just today, as we're taping this program, news of a major merger in the pharmaceutical industry. Pfizer, once again in a merger, and it's going to mean job cuts, and at the same time, a potential big cut in the money that would be available for infrastructure, because they're looking at, if the merger takes place, having headquarters overseas where they don't have to pay as much in federal taxes. So we have that double whammy, both job cuts and less contribution in federal taxes. At the same time, I know you follow the markets, and this is not something that makes stocks go up. Talking about increasing the contribution to federal taxes or to reduce income inequality. Your thoughts on this?
Well, you're referring to the Pfizer-Allergan proposed merger that was announced recently, and I don't quite understand the structure, but they say it's not really a tax inversion, but it's a change in the corporate structure so that the tax domicile will be in Ireland, a lower tax country than the U.S. And these things will probably continue to happen until we fix our tax code. Maybe, as Jim suggests, do away with the corporate income tax. in terms of the income inequality question, one view, I echo Dr. Erickson's view on education and how it might point out the importance of education in an individual's life, and how a quality education and more education is really important in terms of getting a job and keeping a job.
Okay, very, very interesting. And we have another question now.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm a student here at the university. This question is directed to Chris Erickson. You mentioned wages at the high school level and how they're low compared to the rest of the country. How would you say they compare in the college level? And we've also had lower enrollment levels as well. How would you say, what impact would you say that would have in the local economy in the future?
Yeah. Well, of course, people, you just about get $1 million in lifetime income for each degree you earn. And that's a little bit of a oversimplification, but it's actually more accurate than you might expect. So a bachelor's degree is worth $1 million compared to a high school degree. A master's degree is worth $1 million compared to a college degree. And that arises from two factors. One is reduced unemployment. People who are well educated are not unemployed, and people who are less well educated have periods of unemployment, so that those periods of unemployment, when you average them in, reduces the overall income of the individual. College is an extraordinarily good investment for those people who are interested in it. NMSU in particular has been measured over and over again to be among the best investments among colleges. Recently, I think we were ranked 42nd in terms of undervalue by one national news magazine. And the enrollment at NMSU has been going down, but it appears to have turned the corner. I suspect that's more a question of demographics than anything else. We've had smaller high school classes recently, but hopefully that'll turn around. But certainly for the individual, college education is very hard to beat. And by the way, access to good education is one of the best ways of improving income equality, because it allows people to earn better incomes if they have better educations.
And we should mention, especially with all of the negativity that we've talked about over the last hour, there is one very positive piece of news, and it affects not only New Mexico but Las Cruces in particular, and that is the fact that we're going to have a new medical school in town. So this will be a new opportunity for education and for some more jobs, good jobs in our area.
You know, that's something that is very important. I think the medical school, and I think we can give a lot of credit to Dr. Carruthers and to Vice President for Economic Development, Kevin Boberg, for bringing that into our community, as well as others. And that is likely to be one of the single most important economic development events in our community, well, perhaps in the last decade or even further back, because not only does the medical school provide educational opportunities, but also will be a place for federal grants, a place for research, a place for training people to go on to have really good jobs, and I think it's going to be a boom for our community.
And incredibly important, because healthcare is one of those sectors that actually is growing, thank goodness. So we have more jobs and hopefully better healthcare for society as well. We have another question. Hello.
My name is Trey Wilcoxon. I'm from San Bernardino, California. Being from California, our gas prices are fairly higher than here in Cruces, and from hearing Professor Peach talk about the debt that we're in, being in trillions of dollars, what do you feel personally that would get us out of that debt?
Oh, the debt I was referring to are essentially bonds issued in the oil and gas industry. And they were issued, as I said, at $100 a barrel. And they're going to have to write down all those assets and write down the income flows from that. And so the debt is essentially junk. And the way to get out of out of junk is to sell it cheap.
How long do you think this is going to last, Dr. Peach, in terms of our oil price? Do you think that we're going to see a big increase, a gradual increase, or is it going to stay steady? I mean, some people even think it could go lower.
Goldman Sachs last week said we could see $20 a barrel of oil. Boone Pickens says we'll have $70 a barrel oil by next July. If you look at what's out there, we've got a lot of supply on the market. We've got the big players in the industry, BP, Halliburton, Schlumberger, Chevron, all laying off people and cutting back on investment in the industry.
Yeah.
And when the big people think that they need to stop investing and to lay off workers, the big guys are thinking that the price is not going up for a while.
And just recently, a report came out that you may have seen. Texas, just Texas, in the last year has lost more than 50,000 jobs in the oil industry.
Texas in the last 12 months has lost 68,000 jobs in the oil and gas sector. But overall, they grew by 25,000 jobs over the year. They have a very diversified economy. It is not the same thing that we're facing. We had the oil and gas industry as the state's leading economic sector for about 4 or 5 years, and at $40 oil and less than $3 gas, that's not happening right now.
Right.
The odd thing is we're likely to set another production record this year in New Mexico. We keep right on producing, even in the face of falling prices.
Okay, very interesting. Another question.
Hi, I'm Dave Greenberg, and I really appreciate this talk today. I'm a former teacher, so I also really appreciate the comments about how investing in education can really yield long-term economic development. And I was hoping that you could comment on the proposal that's gained some traction in recent years to take a slice of the land grant permanent fund at the state level to fund early childhood education in the state, and just to talk a little bit about how that initiative could yield returns locally and statewide.
So a very famous economist by the name of Heckman, who has won the Nobel Prize, did a study on this, and he found that the return to early child education is extraordinarily high. And it is very difficult to think of a program that would yield higher returns than improved early child education from an economic perspective. And of course, from the perspective of the child benefits from it immensely. They benefit in the short run because, you know, my wife used to say, why are we taking our kids to daycare? And I said, because they like it. It's fun for them. And so it's both good for the kid because they enjoy it, and it's good for the kid because they can gain benefits from it.
Okay, very interesting, and I know you can read a lot more about this online. In fact, when we post the Chamber Economic Forum online, we'll look for some links for you on the impact of early childhood education and put those along with this video. We have another question.
Hi, yes, my name is Robert Gatto. I'm also a student here at New Mexico State University, and my question is more for Professor Erickson. My degree is in criminal justice, and I just wanted to know, as far as like our prison population, I know that federally 49% of our federal inmates are drug offenders, and 21% in New Mexico. So I want to know what we could do by maybe decriminalizing at least marijuana, or as Professor Joseph from NMSU also says, maybe decriminalizing all drugs. What economic effects would that have as far as maybe putting it back into the school systems, as Professor Erickson said, paying our teachers more, or anything else?
Well, one of the few things you can get agreement on with economists is the war on drugs, and economists are almost unanimous in saying that we should legalize drugs. Now, I'm not for legalizing people selling drugs that are poisonous or something like that, because that does happen, but the common drugs that people are addicted to, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, should be legalized and, in my opinion, treated like alcohol. The benefit to the economy from that is relatively modest. But what is beneficial is for the individuals who are addicted to the drugs, who are able then to go get treatment and help if they're addicted. The same way with alcohol. I'm not saying it's any better or worse than what would be having with alcohol. And then, of course, the benefit from a reduced prison population, having those people not in prison but out in the workforce being productive, would be substantial.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question.
Hello, my name is Brenda Martinez. I'm also a student here at New Mexico State University. And I believe that as students, we worry about finding a job, obviously, after graduation that relates to what we studied. So my question is, what is your forecast on employment rate for recent college graduates within the following year, both in Las Cruces and in the state of New Mexico?
Okay. You want me to do that? I'll be glad to do that. First, I'll tell you what I tell all students who walk into my office and say, what should I major in? And I say, find something that you like. And don't worry about current conditions in the labor market. It's likely to have changed by the time you graduate. And that's, I still think, good advice. The numbers I cited earlier, if you are a college graduate, you will be unemployed about half the time that somebody who is just a high school graduate is, 2.5% versus 5%. In terms of forecasts in Las Cruces and New Mexico, we've essentially had no job growth in Las Cruces in a decade. And so the prospects are not good here. You can do all kinds of things to, that doesn't mean there's no turnover. There's lots of turnover, and you can find jobs here. In New Mexico, last year, for the first time in a half a century, we lost population, and that's largely an economic phenomenon. People are leaving the state because we are still 24,000 jobs below where we were in December '07, with no prospect that that's going to disappear anytime soon. So chances are, you're going to be mobile. You're going to go someplace else.
Okay, and maybe come back.
And maybe come back.
That's right.
I saw a survey last week that said some incredible percentage, like 55 or 60% of all Americans die within 200 miles of where they were born.
That's very interesting. Okay, another question. Want to get to it because we only have a few minutes.
All right, my name is Rana Akbarth. I'm also a student here at NMSU. Recently, Las Cruces raised the minimum wage to $8.40 compared to New Mexico's $7.50. Do you think that that has a impact on Las Cruces job growth, seeing as it is at a negative?
Okay.
No.
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 No. No. Okay.
The studies show that minimum wage has very little impact on, or negative impact on employment. If it is any impact, it's very small.
Okay. We are going to get in one more question, I think, in our final minutes here on the Chamber Economic Forum. And I just want to say, I think we've had more young people in this economic forum than any other that we've hosted. And I am, in Thanksgiving week, very thankful for that because we need more young people involved in public policy. Another question.
Hi, my name is Allison Daw, and I'm a student here at New Mexico State. My question was, as 2015 comes to an end, what are your forecasts for the upcoming year, 2016?
Okay. And who are you talking to? Me?
Sure.
Let's go through all three. Yeah.
Sure. Nationally, we continue to muddle along, and we'll have about 2.5%, maybe 3% GDP growth next year if we're lucky. The labor market will be about the same. We'll still sell a lot of automobiles. In New Mexico, to preempt my colleague here a little bit, we're still going to be behind the 8 ball in terms of the labor market and economic growth. We're not likely to recover the number of jobs we had in December '07 until sometime in late '17 or early '18, and that's if we have a pickup in employment. We're in bad shape. We have no leading sector in the economy other than healthcare, which has been driven by the expansion of Medicaid. We have almost 800,000 New Mexicans out of a population of 2 million who are currently on Medicaid. And that Medicaid expansion has driven healthcare employment. And you know, we need something else going on here.
I don't have anything to add to Dr. Peach's forecast, except I'll be a little bit specific about what the rate is. His analysis was right on the money, except to add that I predict that growth in New Mexico will be approximately half the national average. And so if we have 2.5% or 3% nationally, we'll have 1.25% to 1.5% locally. And that's because we're dependent on federal spending, and the federal spending is not likely to pick up anytime in the near future.
Okay, and Dr. Martin?
Well, my fearless forecast on the stock market is down 10%. But what that brings to mind is there'll be a continuation of the volatility that we've seen. Maybe not the crazy 9–10% in a week kind of changes, but I think there'll be a continued volatility, and at some point we'll retest those August lows of about 16,000 on the Dow.
Okay, well, on this Thanksgiving week, thank you to all of you who volunteer your time with us for the Chamber Economic Forum. We appreciate it very much at KRWG, and I know the Chamber appreciates it. Thanks to the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce for partnering with us on this, and thanks to all of you who are members of KRWG, because in-depth journalism is only possible with your support. You can become a member or renew that membership anytime at krwg.org. For all of us at KRWG, I'm Fred Martino. Happy Thanksgiving.